Oh, you talking about I Am New Orleans. Oh, no.
Okay. So, good. So we're on.
Okay, are we on?
Oh, yeah, let me just double check. Yep. Perfect. Great.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our crowdcast, and we have my baby, Malik Bartholomew, it is loud self. And I have the pleasure of introducing two and several of my favorite members. Two are sitting right here, and they both are editors and authors and fathers and all of the above. They don't like too many accolades, and I know that, especially the one they call Kalamu Yasalam. But anyway, he's my brother. He is my brother. And of course, Jarvis is me and baby brother. So we, my baby brother. They say, I bet y'all won't get me to introduce anybody anymore, So here we have I Feel to Believe, and this is a selected essays, and also I Am New Orleans, edited by, of course, Kalamu Yasalam, Jarvis Deberry, and Kalamu Yasalam together again, back together. So here it is. Here are my favorite people in the world. Y'all sit back and enjoy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you.
And for those who will be watching this either live or streamed on our Facebook Live platform, please do follow us on this new platform of Crowdcast. Just hit the little Community Book Center icon when you have a chance as you're watching this, and then hit follow so that you can then stay up on our future programming. But thank you for joining us, and I will hit the stage now to Jarvis Deberry and Kalamu Yasalam. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Hey, Kalamu, how you doing? I'm doing good. Not as good as you, but I'm trying. I'll get there. Well, I appreciate that. You probably are doing better. I have a little summer cold, the first infection I've had in 2 years. So it's like, oh, this is what it's like in the real world these days. But I'm good. I'm really happy that we were asked to do this. It's a big thing for both I Am New Orleans and I Feel to Believe to both be considered for One Book New Orleans. And a lot of that, a whole bunch of that has to do with you and your outsized influence in our literary community. And I wanted to say not only thank you for all you've done for New Orleans and the community, but for me and my family personally. So I just wanted to start there. And I thought we could start with, how I came to be at NOMO. My NOMO Literary Society, for people who don't know, was created by Kalamu. What year, Kalamu? Was that 95, 96? I'm not good at years, but it was 10 years almost to the day when Katrina hit. So that was 2005 to 95. I would say NOMO itself started in 95. I had been doing a lot of work with what you would call, I guess you'd call it mentoring and what have you, but I'd been doing different kinds of programs. And then in the summer of 95, I had been invited out to Suno to do a workshop with men at Suno. And it was specifically for men. And Keisha Ayo, her name is Ayo now, whom I know you know. Yes. She's from Georgia. She got a little bulldog in her. she got up in my face one day and said, "What's with this?" I said, "What are you talking about?" She's, "This thing you doing out at this thing out at Suno or something that is just for men. What's with that?" I said, well, I was asked to do something at Suno. It wasn't, I didn't plan it or anything. Yeah, but you're doing it. So, so one thing led to another. And I said, okay, we'll select. And so in September, when that program was finished, in September, we started NOMO. And
Yeah.
And Keisha, Ayo, I keep saying both names, but Ayo does not suffer fools
At all.
at all, at all.
Yes.
So if I promised to do something, I had to do it.
Yeah.
And we carried through with that and started NOMO. And that's why when people say that Kalamu started NOMO, I have to correct them and tell Kalamu's name may have been the figurehead, but it was Keisha,
Yeah.
Ayo now, who really was the impetus for the development of NOMO. Once we got NOMO started, at the time I had an office in Treme, in fact, on Treme Street. And we met there, and that office was actually the house that was owned by the Eli family, Lolis Eli Sr. and Jr. And we met there on a weekly basis. But the most interesting part about meeting there was that the house was actually the last residence of Tom Dent, who was my mentor.
Yeah.
And so in many ways, I felt like I'm carrying on a tradition that was started. And then shortly thereafter, after starting NOMO, there was a young man who came chasing after this woman. And before I know it, he can tell you. He can tell that story himself. I don't want to get into that story, but he's in New Orleans, and he said he's from Mississippi. I said, wait a minute, you from Mississippi? What you doing here? Well, you see, there was, and I don't want to go into the whole story because it's a different woman than his wife now, his current wife.
Yes, it is. That woman is way in the past, everybody. Way in the past.
And he was not the only person. The workshop was loaded with people of varying. This is the thing I think is important. NOMO was never a one-trick pony. We had people who had gone to college. We had people who had graduate degrees. We had people who had no degrees. We had people like myself who started college and dropped out because, later for that. But NOMO had a range of people. And I think, Jarvis, you can speak about the range of your colleagues and comrades.
Yeah, I'll say first that I came to NOMO because of Cassandra Lane. We were colleagues at the time, Picayune, and I was telling her about how I wanted to find a writing community, a writing workshop. And you know that thing that we sometimes do? We say we want something, and the person gives us the answer as to what to do, and then we keep asking the same person over and over again. And a certain person said, I already told you. I told you there's this workshop. We meet on Tuesday night, and it's free. I mean, you can come by whenever you want to come by. And so my personal story of NOMO is I didn't like y'all at all at first, to be perfectly honest, because it was unlike any type of workshop I'd ever been in before. And by that, I mean that the ethos of seemingly every other workshop out there is you make the person feel good. You tell them, oh, this is good, or, oh, we understand, and what I appreciated about NOMO was the focus on the work and the work alone. I think it was more than a lot of people could take, but it really was what I really wanted and needed. This idea that we don't care about your feelings, really, and we're not going to try to tiptoe around.
Leave your feelings at the door. You're noble now.
But also it was, we are here to critique the whole work and not just how artful you may be. And so what I remember, a moment that stands out for me is Asali, who's now at Ashe, writing this poem.
She's the director of Ashe.
She mentioned a beautiful swan. And Kalamu asked, well, what makes a swan beautiful? And you started talking about Hans Christian Andersen and the ugly duckling and white supremacy and these images that we have stuck in our heads. And we couldn't have gotten that in any other workshop. Like in no other workshop was your use of a beautiful swan going to be interrogated the way that you interrogated it in Nomo. And that was, for me, probably the most important writing instruction that I needed. That my mom was an English teacher. I know the basics of grammar very well. I've been to college. I know how to, put words together very, very nicely. But what does this mean? And not just what does it mean in the literal sense, but what does it mean for Black people? What does it mean symbolically? What does it mean politically? Those are not the types of instruction that I would have, and I won't say just interrogation, but just going back and forth with other people and discussing their work and wrestling over the work. And, I don't think that the columns that exist in this book would be nearly as good as they are if I hadn't had that training ground. Most of these columns were written, or many of them were written during a time where every Tuesday night, 4, 3, 4, 5, 6 hours every night, we were sitting around the table discussing work and discussing why it was good and discussing how it could be made better. And it was also the way that I really situated myself in New Orleans. Like I don't think I could have really called myself a real New Orleanian. At least I couldn't do it until I had been in Nomo. Because first of all, we were in Treme, and not just, not in one of those places where you wonder, is this Treme? Is this the Seventh Ward? No, it wasn't none of that. You were like on Treme Street, right? And you can't escape the culture. The culture comes to get you. The culture is all around you. And just being situated there made a lot of the stuff that I wrote possible. So I wanted to start with one of those columns that I don't think I could have written or would have had the consciousness to write had I not been in Nomo. This one was from December 6, 2005. That is obviously the same year as Katrina. It's December now. Excuse me. It's December now, and people in the city are starting to think and plan Mardi Gras. And people outside the city, well, first of all, there are two different groups of people outside the city. There are the people outside the city who have no experience whatsoever with New Orleans and Mardi Gras. And they're asking, what are y'all, crazy? Like, why are you trying to have Mardi Gras when you just, you barely just got from underwater? And then there's a second group of people, the people who are from New Orleans, who are not in New Orleans, and they're asking, how could y'all do this when we ain't there? So, so this is this big debate, should New Orleans have a carnival, 7, 8 months after the hurricane? So
it wasn't that long, because the hurricane hit the end of August. So September, October, it was December, if I remember correctly. Yeah, somewhere around there.
Yeah. So triumph over sorrow is our MO. And it begins with um, the end of Lucille Clifton's poem, which is probably one of her most famous lines. Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed.
Failed, yeah.
We are alive. Ask us how our thoughts could turn to celebration after we've suffered so much, how we could think about Mardi Gras even as we continue to suffer, and that's the only answer we can provide. We are alive. Yes, we've lost things. We've lost homes, big ones, little ones, shotguns, camelbacks, cottages, mansions. We've lost neighborhoods, rich ones, poor ones, mixed ones, loud ones, quiet ones. We've lost schools and congregations. We've lost jobs. We've lost our sense of community, our sense of security. And some of us may feel that we've lost or are losing whatever grip we had on our sanity. We've lost people, not just random people either, but loved ones, mamas and daddies, marans and parans, our neighbors, our classmates, grandparents. So many grandparents. You ask, who in their right minds would think of this as a time to plan a celebration? We would. We who had death lapping at our ankles. We who had to crane our necks for the next breath. We who hacked our way out of our attics. We who returned to homes that were moldy and muddy, homes that had fallen down, homes that had been washed off their foundations and had moved on down the street. It might not make sense to you. Perhaps you hear our plans and ask, how could you? Try to understand. This is what we do. This is who we are. Defiance defines us. And at this time and in this place, nothing needs to be more assiduously defied than death itself. We know how to do that. We created the jazz funeral, not out of disrespect for the deceased, but out of a need to celebrate the life that was lived and a determination to press forward joyfully, no matter how hard life's trials. Jazz wouldn't have been jazz without the drum. And the drum that sparked its evolution would never have been played if the Africans who were brought here in bondage hadn't decided that they had traditions worth carrying forward. I can imagine that at least one person who was brought over in the hold of a ship felt it inappropriate to drum, to sing, to dance in Congo Square. But imagine this city, imagine this nation, imagine this world if those original Afro New Orleanians had let their sorrow, the sorrow over never seeing home or any of their loved ones ever again, completely rob them of the cultures they cherished. New Orleans would have never have become the city we all loved. And it won't be that lovable city again if we don't fight for our traditions. At a town hall meeting held in Atlanta Saturday, a woman asked Mayor Ray Nagin, how could we be having Mardi Gras? We aren't even there. Others say it disrespects the dead. They say it gives outsiders the impression that everything in New Orleans is okay. I say it gives them proof that we aren't dead. The argument that February 28th is too soon to celebrate assumes that one day our sorrow will expire. It won't. As long as we can remember the people who died, our collective sadness will linger. Mardi Gras won't abolish that sorrow, no more than the happy music played during second lines obliterates the memory of the departed. But it will announce to the world that that which tried to kill us did not succeed. We know what has happened to us. A celebration won't mean we've forgotten. It will let the world know not only that we aren't dead, but that we have no intentions of dying.
Yes, sir. That's Jarvis Deberry, y'all. And
I appreciate it.
I want to back up a little bit. Jarvis, you wrote that defiance of death, let's call it. And people might not understand NOMO You might think it was just like you said, it was a writing workshop, but there was something qualitatively different about what we were doing, as you've alluded to. And I'd like to just take a minute to explain that to people. First of all, NOMO, NOMMO, is the Bantu word. And the Bantu word refers to the power of the spoken word, NOMO. And I used to joke that NOMO really meant no more of that literary shit. You're gonna write really what's happening in your life, and each person has their own life and life experiences, and that's what we want you to write about. And for some people, that was almost heresy, and for other people, it was a breath of fresh air, because they said, "You mean I don't have to read nothing?" I said, "Yeah, you got to read now, but I want you to write about your life experiences." And so that was the thing about NOMO, the word and the workshop, what it meant. The other thing was we had at least I introduced a 3-part workshop. The first part of the workshop, we studied different things, and I'm autodidact, for those who like that kind of stuff. That means I taught myself what to do. And I have a short attention span, but a wide open mind. So from week to week, y'all never knew what was going to be presented in the first part of the workshop. I'd come in there, sometimes I'd have a friend of mine in town, and I'd say, "Hey, why don't you come?" I remember Amiri Baraka coming to the workshop, and people sitting there because they didn't know. I didn't announce it beforehand, and he coming there for the regular workshop, and there Amiri is sitting up in there,
Exactly.
And I think that kind of I would say that kind of atmosphere encourage people to think broadly and not to think narrowly or think of just writing techniques or what have you.
Yeah. But I would also say, Klambu, that what you just said, to have us to write about our own experiences, sometimes that took us, I should speak for myself. For me, that led to me really thinking about what are my experiences. I don't even remember the other person that he was being compared to, but on one of our workshops, there was I guess it was a study piece that we had that evening, and it mentioned how there was this other poet who was a contemporary of Langston Hughes, who was like way more popular than he was, like
Vachel Lindsay.
20s.
Yeah.
Who was it again?
Vachel Lindsay.
Okay.
Yeah.
And yet I had to ask you his name, right? But nobody would ever have to ask Langston Hughes's name. And that led to this discussion about the blues and the blues form and blues poetry. Now, I grew up in rural Mississippi, and so the blues was all around me, and the sound of the blues. And I would even say that the sound of the church and the sound of the blues are near identical from where I grew up. But it had never occurred to me that that could be in my poetry, or that should be in my writing, until that particular workshop. And so the next thing I know is like, well, let me just try to write a blues poem and see how that goes. And my most successful poems and my most successful poetry came out of that tradition, deciding that, okay, I've been, hearing this all of my life, learning Langston Hughes poems as I was 5 or 6 year old in the church Black History program. And, why not actually write like that? And even even the column I just read comes out of that tradition and that musicality, or that, thinking about how this sounds, and using the alliteration and using the assonance and using the repetition. I don't think that column would exist in the same form without us having all those conversations that we had in NOMA.
Yeah, and I think that you're absolutely right about the environment helping you to shape what you were doing as a writer. The environment affects all of us, and it's just that NOMA was an environment that I consciously thought about because I'd had so many years of experience working with different people doing that work. And I had been mentored by Tom Dent, and we were in the building, the very building that was formerly his residence. And Tom introduced me. He had a wide range of reading. So I'd go visit Tom sometimes, and he'd say, did you think about such and such? I said, well, what is such and such? And he said, he'd point to his library and said, go over that, look for that book, look for that book.
Yeah.
And I'd go get the book. And so he said, now you read it, And so I had a background that was not, I didn't come through formal education. I didn't come through MFA programs. I didn't come through college, for my background was in working with people. And I had both an activist and a literary background. Through Tom, I had a literary background, but I also had an activist background. So I brought all of that to the table. And people like Jarvis, he'd come in there and he'd ask all kinds of questions. He says he may not have liked it at first, but boy, would he ask you some questions. Well, why you said that? I said, well, such and such and such. He said, okay, such and such and such and such, but why did you say that? So and so may have said, but why did you say it? And he wanted to know specifics. And that's part of you being a journalist. You wanted to know specifics. You couldn't just talk general talk with you about writing and what have you. Had to be something
here's the thing,
specific.
And what always impressed me was that you knew those specifics and that you had those specifics. And you were one of those. There are other people I know like this, but I haven't had the opportunity to sit at their feet as much as I have you, who seems to know something about everything. And so, the fact that you had read so widely, and not only read widely, but listened widely. And so, having just met you, I did not have any appreciation for the vastness of your musical knowledge, right? And not just, the stuff that I would associate with people your age having known, but the stuff that my age.
He just called me old. He just called me old. Go ahead.
You are my elder, Kalamu. So that's what I'm saying. What I'm saying by that. But yeah, just that kind of, somebody that has read that, or has the book and can point you to the book, and is contemporary with all of the people that we're reading in these anthologies. And it was so formative and so foundational to the columns that I wrote. And the things that you have mentioned, I don't know how many other people paid attention to them, but, one of the things that you always stressed was metaphorical consistency, right?
Yes.
Don't come in with 2, 3, 4 different metaphors for one particular piece. And so when I was just reading this column just now, it occurred to me that I began with Lucille Clifton, and near the end, I'm saying that this has not killed us, right? And so I'm practicing that metaphorical consistency that you are you are talking about. I wanted to read this other one because this is one of the ones that makes me laugh. And I just probably had some of the most fun writing it. This is called Line Up for Joy, and it was published May 19th, 2006. So we're springtime after Hurricane Katrina, and there won't be any preamble. I'm just going to start. Line Up for Joy, May 19th, 2006. I was standing in a line at City Hall Tuesday afternoon between two women discussing their post-Katrina weight gain and a woman heaping hosannas upon a local pastor who took the spot behind her. The two women ahead of me, one munching popcorn and the other peanut M&Ms, had each gained 26 pounds since the storm, and each professed not to be hungry even as she chewed. The woman behind me was saying, "You're a blessed man," as the pastor reached in his suit jacket, removed a white face cloth, and patted his face and brow. It wasn't hot, but he was a preacher. The lady addressed him by name, and when he asked hers, she exclaimed, "Blessed and highly favored. That's my name, too." Her use of the word "too" made the preacher think he and she shared the same name, but she corrected him. "Blessed and highly favored is her name," she said. He wipes his face, a prolonged wipe. The time was 12:50 p.m., and the five of us were lined up outside door 1W37 to pay or challenge bills we'd received for city services. Alpat, a Slidell collection agency, had sent me notice that the $13 I owed the city for a past-due sanitation bill had been turned over for collection. What past-due sanitation bill? A sign said the office closes for the lunch hour, and when the door opened at 12:55, the women ahead of me perked up. But the man who opened the door was going for a smoke. "You don't need to be smoking them cigarettes," Madam Popcorn said. And as the man continued his walk toward the exit, she and M&M suspended their conversation about their overeating to agree how bad it is to smoke. Meanwhile, Blessed and Highly Favored was talking to the pastor about other pastors they both knew, and he was telling her how much her praise had brightened his day. At 1 p.m., the door opened, and we spilled into the office. The preacher and M&Ms were redirected to an adjacent office where their specific issues could be addressed, leaving behind me, Madam Popcorn, Blessed and Highly Favored, woman behind the desk. Blessed and Highly Favored, who, as it turns out, goes by a different name for billing purposes, told the woman behind the desk that the preacher is one of the most important men in the city, implying that she hadn't shown him proper deference when she sent him away. The woman behind the desk simulated a walking motion with the fingers closest to her thumb and said, "He got two legs," to which Madam Popcorn nodded in agreement. "I respect him," the woman behind the desk said of preachers in general, but her tone made it clear that she wasn't going to throw down palm branches in their path. There were a few seconds of silence as checks were scribbled out and affidavits were signed. Then Blessed and Highly Favored said, "How are you doing, young man?" I said, "I'm doing well, thank you." She worries about young Black men and prays we're going to be all right. Then suddenly, "You love the Lord?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." To the woman behind the desk, she squealed, "Ooh!" He said, "Yes, give me a hug." She handed me what looked to be $1, but was instead a religious tract. A woman who took the second desk told me that the $13 was billed August 26th, that is, 3 days before Katrina. "So how come I wasn't asked to pay it before collections?" I said. "I wouldn't have been around to receive the bill," she said. "Did I want to write a check? Why hadn't I brought my checkbook? I'd assumed it was an error, is why. I had $12 and something that looked like $1, but wasn't. I mentioned a nearby ATM. I don't want you to have to pay $2.50 for $1, she said, referring to the fee the machine exacts, as she pulled from her purse the extra buck I needed. Now who's blessed and highly favored? Blessed and highly favored herself had already left, but I wish I could have thanked her and the others for giving me another answer to the question, what do you like about New Orleans? The answer is the people who can make an ordinary bill-paying trip a joy.
Yes, indeed. Jarvis Deberry. You know,
I think you also taught us, Kalama, just to pay attention and to observe, you know, to look around you, to listen to how the people around us talk, and listen to how they talk. And that was one of the other things I appreciated about Nomo, just the sounds of people. You know, I wasn't from New Orleans. I was relatively.
And we didn't hold it against you either.
No, you didn't. You didn't. And I can, and that's important. I mean, I don't, people outside the city, they might be lost on people outside the city, but there are so many institutions and organizations in New Orleans that would have held that against me, that would have said that you're not as big a part as we could ever be because you didn't go to this high school, or you're not from the 7th Ward, or you're not from across the canal, or you're not, from wherever. And so the fact that you didn't hold that against me, what mattered was the work, and what mattered was our devotion to the work. And so, yeah, thank you. And I wanted to ask you, because we're talking about 2 books tonight, mine and I Am New Orleans, and I wanted to talk about your process of curation, because it was something that I really had to work at and put a lot of time and thought into. And I was curious too about kind of your process of curating. This is not the first thing you've curated, obviously. It's something you have a lot of practice doing, but what process, or what thought went into how you were going to put that particular volume together?
Which volume? Yours or the
I Am New Orleans.
Yeah, I Am New Orleans. Okay.
Yeah.
I have a interest in the world. As you know, I did a lot of traveling, and that was one of the reasons why the NOMO met on Tuesdays. That was because I would travel a lot on the weekends, and I couldn't always be there on Monday. So I said, okay, we'll do Tuesdays. And I didn't want to do the end of the week because often I would leave on a So that was there was a practical reason for a lot of the things that I did, which is not often apparent to people. So when you ask the question, what got me to do that? I Am New Orleans. Part of it, the answer is Tom Dent. Part of the answer is Rudolph Lewis, who had come to New Orleans out of the Baltimore area many years before you arrived. And he fell in love with Marcus Christian. And in fact, he put together a small book of Marcus Christian's poetry. Marcus Christian had a poem I always loved called My Heart is with the Hunted. And he talked about, he would hear a rabbit running in the bush trying to get away from a hawk. And he would say, my heart is with the hunted. I know what happens. Well, I'm going to advance years and years. I come to find out Marcus Christian lived on the same street I grew up on in the Lower Ninth Ward, St. Maurice Avenue. But I didn't know him when I was growing up, even though he lived literally about 13 blocks away down the street. I had no idea that.
Yeah.
And so that's part of the New Orleans tradition, that we can be close and not even know it. And so I began to say, you got to embrace everybody because you never know who they are, you know, where they're going, where they come from. You don't know all of those things. So you just embrace people for what they are until they show you something else. And then you deal with that. The other thing I wanted to point out in this regard, you asked the question, how did I come to this? I would say I didn't. I would say it came to me. I woke up one morning, there it was, boom, knocking on my head. Now, where did it come from? It come from a lot of the experiences I'd had, a lot of the people I met. You mentioned coming to the workshop and talking to Cassandra. Cassandra then signed on. I saw a name when I looked over here.
I saw it too.
Yeah,
yes.
Cassandra has signed on. Cassandra has a book. Now, Cassandra, she got mad and left. You know, you came here chasing a woman. She left chasing a man. You know what I'm saying? I'm joking, y'all. Don't take me serious about nothing. Jarvis know I likes to joke. I likes to joke. But anyway, Cassandra got a book about the Bridges, which is her family name, you know. And that she was working at the Times-Picayune when we met her, when I met her at, with Nomo, and she introduced you to us. But you all both were reporters at the Times-Picayune. And at the same time, you come into a workshop where you got people that's not associated with any Picayune or nothing like that. You know, not even Picayune, Mississippi. I mean, they were just there. And y'all don't know about no Picayune, Mississippi. I'm a school you later on because this ain't the time for it. But there's a place called Picayune, Mississippi. And Jarvis know about it because he come out of Mississippi. But in any case, my point is that our work grew out of our experiences. And my experiences dictated what I would do at any given time. And because I've had a broad range of experience, have traveled virtually around the world, literally, and so forth and so on, but had not been formally educated in a university or college, that meant I had a different slant on things. And that slant on things allowed me to introduce to people, to the members of the workshop, a different kind of experience. I read all kinds of stuff. You know, I had a wide range of, and I think you remember, we had a library at NOMO. And I didn't believe that you could teach people how to write if you couldn't teach them how to read, and you couldn't teach them how to read if you couldn't give them the books at the time. So you come in and somebody would ask a question about fiction writing, for instance, and I might say Milan Kundera. And they said, who? I said, well, go over there. There's the book right there. You know, it got 2 or 3 books. Pick up one of his books. This is a guy out of Eastern Europe. And people wouldn't believe I was, you know, the lightness of being and all like that. I had read all that stuff, but I had read him and I could share that with you all, but I wasn't sharing it in the abstract. I was sharing it as a real experience. There's the book. Go get it. Read it. You know, and so forth and so on. It wasn't just me talking that talk. And so I think that's part of what you all responded to. You were responding to the reality of your investigation of life, your investigations of literature, and not the teacher saying to you, well, this is what this is, and that's what that is. No, you know, it wasn't like that.
Yeah. And what I would say, a couple of things, like the things that you introduced us to, you know, we wouldn't have been introduced to anywhere else. Just a few days ago, I picked up to read again The Man Who Cried I Am, which you had us to read, and you introduced us to that novel. I remember discussing Ryszard Kapuscinski, the Polish travel writer who spent 40, 50 years traveling in Africa. and writing for the Polish news service. Like I actually ended up quoting him in a couple of columns that I wrote, and I would not have even known of his existence if not for Nomo and for you in particular. But yeah, the ability to always say, and what you did probably. One of the things I appreciate most is that you let us know when we thought we were doing something new but weren't. Like there were so many times when one of us would bring in a poem or a short story and we would write it in a certain way that we thought was completely revolutionary. And you say, go pick up that book over there. And you would look at it and say, oh, okay. So this isn't as new as I thought it was, but always kind of linking us to that tradition and explaining to us that, you know, just because it's new in our head does not mean it's new in the world. And, you know, and there are people who have been through the same things that you've been through and have felt and experienced the same conditions and have had similar ideas. And so, so for me, you mentioned I Am New Orleans. What was the driving idea behind this book? First of all, I want to give proper shout out to my wife, Kelly, because this was more her idea than mine. I mean, she really pushed me and saw the value in doing a collection of columns, even when I did not. And so I thank her for that, for, you know, pushing me to do it, even when I was hesitant to do it. But if you recall, kind of the first draft we had, it was much bigger than what is actually published now. And I think I was kind of going for a, you know, Jarvis Deberry anthology. This is a collective works of me. And whereas it is still that, I really wanted to make sure that to the greatest extent possible, it was a book, and is a book about New Orleans, that it tells, at least from one person's point of view, the story of New Orleans over about a 20-year period. And so after putting together the first draft, I really went through and took out some of the columns that I really loved a great deal, but took them out because I didn't feel that it was consistent with the theme of being in New Orleans, of tracking kind of what was happening in the city over a 20-year period. And it was a really useful exercise for me to pull together everything that I had written, column-wise, opinion-wise, over that point, and then going through them all, reading all of it, and then compiling this particular volume. It was interesting for a couple of reasons. One, I could see more clearly what some of my early critics had to say about me in ways that I couldn't understand it initially. And two, I was back and forth between, do I want this to be more reflective of me, my sensibilities now, or do I want it to also include pieces that I may not feel as strongly about anymore? I erred on the side of these are the columns that more meet my sensibilities now, because I think I would give the impression that if I publish this in 2020, I think most people will assume that you're endorsing this, agreeing with this in 2020. But at the same time, I think at a certain point in me, I would like to kind of openly discuss the columns that I won't say I shouldn't have written, but will say I wouldn't write it right now. You know, like, like that was kind of like, I'll tell you a column that I really, really strongly thought about including. First of all, it didn't have anything to do with New Orleans, so that kind of freed me from it. But I wrote this column about Fantasia's song "Baby Mama," when it came out. And I wrote about it in the context of being at a Walgreens and seeing this young, like 15-year-old girl clearly wearing a like Catholic high school skirt buying a pregnancy test. And it was like the exact same time that the Fantasia song was out there. And it more important to me than the column was the lesson I learned about not judging or not assuming who my readers were. Because I wrote this column saying I didn't care a whole lot about Fantasia's song, Baby Mama. And my phone was ringing off the hook all day long from self-professed baby mamas, right? And part of me was thinking, I mean, I'll just say it because we're having this conversation. My first unedited thought was, y'all read the paper? And I was like, but it occurred to me, of course they read the paper. Like everybody in New Orleans, and that was a thing that, you know, that we were constantly being told as employees at the Times-Picayune, like how high our penetration was. Like the percentage of people who would read the Times-Picayune every day was like higher than any other city in New Orleans. That's what we were always told. And so I was confronted with that when people were calling me up and dialing me up and telling me what an awful human being that I was. But it was probably the best lesson I got. And first of all, don't make assumptions about who's reading you. Don't make assumptions based on anything. You know, assume that if you're writing about somebody, they're going to find out about it. You know, and assuming that if you're writing something that people are going to care about, that they're going to hear about it one way or the other. And so that made me a lot more conscious of my responsibility, like the responsibility that I had to bring to this position. I did not think that I should have been the only Black columnist, or at one point, one of two Black columnists. But the reality was that that's what I was, and that's who I was. And so people had certain expectations of me because I was in such a coveted position. Yeah. And as I think we discussed in the interview for the book, it did not mean and doesn't mean that I have to write everything that, you know, I think everybody else will agree with or that nobody will object to. But it does mean that I have to acknowledge
the audience.
And yeah, I have to acknowledge the audience, and I can't disregard them. You know, I can't say, oh, well, you know, I don't care what anybody thinks, or I don't care what folks have to say about this, because I do. And I mattered to people who were reading the paper because I was there. And I didn't really fully get that at first. I didn't fully get what an important role I had essentially stumbled into.
Yeah.
But then it finally began to dawn on me. And again, and part of that awakening was because I was in NOMO every week. And so because you were questioning us when we would mention a beautiful swan, or because you were questioning us in the way that we wrote certain things. And also because you told us not to be tour guides. Like, I remember that very clearly, you know, you telling us not to, not to be white people's tour guides. And that stuck with me. Like, I remember very, very clearly, there was this occasion when Trent Lott, the senator from Mississippi, praised Strom Thurmond and said something about how much better off the country would have been if Strom Thurmond had gotten elected president in 1948, right? And so when everybody erupts in anger, he starts backtracking and talking about how many Black friends he has. And so in a column I wrote that Emperor Lott is trying to convince us that he really does have his FUBU on. And I remember one of the editors saying, "Do you want to explain what FUBU is?" I said, "No." I'm gonna do it. And so if they want to know what the FUBU clothesline it is, they're just gonna have to go and figure it out. But I wouldn't have done that if you hadn't been stressing to us, not to be tour guides. And also, if there were a reference to somebody in the newspaper that I didn't get, or in somebody's poem that I didn't get, the expectation would be that I would look it up, and that I would go find out, who that person is that's being referred to. And so I just remember saying, no, I'm not gonna explain that reference. And but yeah, those were like some of the ways those lessons of NOMO kind of kept showing up in the work that I was doing.
Yeah, I would say that one of the things I consciously thought about, if you remember, we not only had what was a major library, over 5,000 books that we referred to, but I had a little shelf that was just dictionaries. Some of them were very old dictionaries. Some of them were specialized dictionaries and what have you. And so I wasn't just saying, well, this is blah, blah, blah. I would say, check that out. Go check that out. And leave it up to you all to decide whether you're going to read it or not, because that's what Tom did to me. He would point to different books and say, go check that out. And it was up to me whether I really checked it out or not. And I think that was the major thing that was a major thing, I should say, that everybody in the workshop felt that it was incumbent upon them to decide how much of the process they wanted to participate in. I wasn't going to force anybody to do anything. And I didn't ask anybody to write like I wrote or anything else like that. But,
and you didn't ask us to write at all. I mean, honestly, there was no requirement that you read something in workshop. There was no requirement that you write a poem or write a short story. But what I felt was, when someone else wrote something that was hip, it was like, okay, I want to write something too. Like I want somebody to say something positive about something that I wrote. And so that was, I think, the driving, impetus for so many of us. When Lynn would have a short story, or Nadir would have a particular poem, or
about the roaches. Nadir had a poem about roaches. Remember that one?
Yes, the flying roach,
flying cockroach. Yeah, and I don't know if any other workshop where
and to make a parable out of a cockroach who could fly, and lowered his ability to fly over everybody, all the other roaches. It was just brilliant, but that's not something that I could have imagined coming out of many other workshops. And so on one hand, I wanted to stress to people that, yes, you obviously had your hand in this book in particular, in the fact that it's on Runagate, it's in print at UNO Press, and that you interviewed me at the back, and that we, conceptualized the book together. But you're also in it, and NOMO is also in it, because the writing that readers will get here was really honed. And I really thought about craft in ways that I hadn't thought about craft before, because I was in the workshop that I was in, because I was being challenged, because people were asking questions, because people were saying, I don't think that's you used that word before, why are you repeating that word? This is something that you do in almost all of your poems. This is a word that you use in almost everything you write. Calling attention to the ways that we were doing things, really, really, shaped, the way that I wrote these columns and approached these columns. So yeah, thank you for that.
Well, let me play psychologist a minute. Don't worry about that. Let me play psychologist for 1 minute. I'll throw out something and you can give a response. What about axle blocks and engines?
What about what? I'm sorry.
Axle blocks and engines in a vehicle.
Yeah,
Y'all notice
I'm
how
still
he laughed.
looking. Yeah, well, see, I say that because I've been searching for this essay. I thought it was on this other computer that I had. It's still on some hard drive I'm trying to put my hand onto. So it's engine blocks and tire axles. The piece you're referring to actually came out directly out of my work as a crime reporter for the Times-Picayune. The overall story is that I was working the Saturday night, 5 p.m. to 1 a.m. shift, the crime desk. About 10 p.m., the police radio lit up with a report of a shooting in LaBeouf Court. I had no idea where LaBeouf Court was. It was in the Fisher Housing Development.
In Algiers, yeah.
Yes. Drove over, and when I got there, they were wheeling 2 people away who had been shot. They were not dead. They were injured. And it was my first, it was in the first 6 months that I had been at the Times-Picayune. And I was so incredibly naive, and I was so naive that I asked the questions that I actually asked on the scene. So I say to a group of people standing at the housing development, does anybody know who got shot? And this woman raises her hand and says, my son got shot. She gave me all his information, told me his, all his particulars. And then I say to the same group of people, does anybody know who shot him? Woman raises her hand. My son shot him and gave me all her son's information, his criminal record, his age, where he lived, everything. And I remember, seriously, you're like giving me all this information right now. So that's where that essay starts. But what ends up happening, I'm in the car with a photographer. He gets an alert that they think they're chasing a suspect. He asks me to come along with him, and we jump out of the car. The police are pounding on this door where they think the suspect is holed up. And the photographer says to me, engine block and tire axles, those are the 2 things that stop a bullet. Don't crouch down behind the door. And I just there, like, wait, what? Like, I'm out here. First of all, my story was over like 15 minutes ago. I talked to the 2 mothers. I got all the information I needed 15, 20 minutes ago. Now you got me out here crouching down behind the door, or not behind the door, because you told me I shouldn't crouch down behind the door.
Right.
I crouch down behind engine blocks and tire axles because those are what stop a bullet. And I'm like, man, what the hell am I doing out here, right? And so I go from that, the fact that this crime occurs, the fact that I'm now in physical danger, but it ends with noticing how I appear to be the only person that's really freaked out about all of this. And particularly this young girl going by on rollerblades or roller skates. And, again, I'm not from the projects. I'm not even from an urban environment. I'm from rural Mississippi. But seeing how all of this is normal, like this child, there are police at this very moment banging on the door with guns drawn, demanding that and a shooter, who they think is a shooter, come out so they can arrest him. And at the same moment, there's this girl like on roller skates. And we're talking late at night. We're not talking about like high noon, right? So there's this little girl like roller skating by and just taking in all that scene. taking in all of that. Like I told you before I left St. Louis, a journalist there had told me when I expressed to him concerns about, writing about crime, he said, "You tell the truth. You tell the truth. That's what your job is." And so Engine Blocks and Tire Axles was my attempt to take you behind, because I'm sure the story in the paper was 8 to 10 inches, right? Mm-hmm. Black people on a Saturday night in the housing projects shot each other. Police say, the injuries are not life-threatening, et cetera, the end. That is a story that the newspaper expected of me. But the story that I felt that was worth telling was a story about this environment, and I don't mean this environment in this standoffish, those people over there kind of way, but the fact that these two mothers, the mother of the gunman, the mother of the person who got shot, could stand there and have conversations and share love and affection for one another, even as their children were beefing with one another. And the fact that, this little girl is in the shot, essentially, probably not in the photographer's shot because he had his, lens trained on the door. But in my view, I could see both that and this little girl at the same time. That to me was
New Orleans.
It was just it was New Orleans, and it was one of those nights that jumped out at me, and to me demanded kind of exploration. And so, thank you. I'm still trying to track down that piece, and I hope I can put my hands on it again one day. I'm going to read just one more.
But before you go, Marion Moore, and I'll tell you why I said Marion Moore. Marion was a member of NOMO, and
yes,
Marion is one of these, to use the vernacular, oddballs. She's an oddball in the sense that she wasn't from New Orleans. She's from Shreveport, right?
Yes.
She comes to New Orleans. She's working in informational technology, IT, right? And she's a converted Jew. She has converted to Judaism, and she's Black.
Yes.
And she's in NOMO, and in NOMO she was not an oddball. I mean, all the rest of y'all was, because we had all kinds.
I think most of us were oddballs.
We had all kinds of people there, and so I'm saying Marion Moore as an example of the diversity that we had in the workshop. And what did you think about that diversity?
Yeah, it was beautiful, and the fact, and we were a very tight microcosm of, I think, Black people around the world. That we brought to the workshop this variety of experiences, variety of life experiences, belief systems, geography, professional status, our proximity to whiteness. There was this like vast diversity, and I don't personally remember any friction. I don't remember that causing anybody to care one way or the other. We had everybody, and what we cared most about was the work and the importance of that work. And so I always just thought that it was just a beautiful experience, an opportunity to just sit down and discuss work. And we were all kind of quirky in that way. It was not, I think each of us, I mean, it's a weird thing by itself to want to be a writer. You know, that's not something that most people care about, to that extent. So I think all of us felt that we were at home in a real way, um, just by being at NOMO. I wanted to read this one thing. I think we're getting closer, and this was written a few days after the Mother's Day shooting in 2013, where gunmen opened up on a second line Mother's Day parade. And ironically, I had just written for that Mother's Day, had just interviewed 5 different mothers in New Orleans who had lost children and to gun violence. And this happens on that particular day. Murder epidemic leaves us at a loss for words. Write about crime and murder in New Orleans with any regularity, and you'll find yourself reaching for nouns. It happens to me just about every time. I'm trying to convey the heartlessness, the nihilism, the depravity of young men aimlessly sending bullets into birthday parties and second line parades, into the bodies of enemies and unsuspecting passersby. And I feel myself grasping for the right noun, something with a stronger emotional impact and a more provocative connotation than man or teenager or even shooter or murderer. I've used gunman, but that only applies to the single moment the subjects hold a piece of steel in their hands and doesn't seem to get at the essence of who they are. I've used criminals, but the word doesn't seem adequate. Weed smokers are criminals. People who cheat on their taxes or shoplift lipstick or obstruct the sidewalk are criminals. And I'm going to skip to a few pages, a page over. This isn't mere semantics. The nouns we choose reveal our relationship to the violent people we're talking about. The nouns we choose indicate whether we think they are redeemable or hopeless, reachable or incorrigible. The nouns we choose reveal what we think ought to happen to them when they transgress. It's not for nothing that prosecutors portray capital murder defendants as animals and monsters. You can't simultaneously acknowledge another's humanity and cast a vote to kill him. So yeah, I when I was putting together these columns, I really wanted to hit on all of those constant news stories in New Orleans. You can't write about New Orleans, unfortunately, without writing about how close we all are to violence and how, how we're all at most 1 degree away from violence. Everybody knows somebody who has been killed or been murdered, or who has had somebody be killed or murdered or been shot
or incarcerated.
Yes. And so, that reality persists. Obviously, we're talking about some of the same things now, and I would argue that that same question applies. Like, what do we call people who are doing these things? And I think that if we ask ourselves those questions, then I think we, as I write in the piece, are at least headed toward what we think the solution really ought to be. Even if we can't reach the solution or don't make it to that solution, I think the language that we use points us in whatever direction that would be.
Jarvis Deberry, y'all. Give him a hand. It's been a real pleasure talking with Jarvis. And I just want to add that Jarvis is on one hand special, and on the other hand, just like all the other members of NOMO. And that's one of the things I think was important, that everybody was allowed to be themselves and at the same time be part of a greater whole that was Nomo. So you didn't have to be like anybody else to be in Nomo, but to be in Nomo, you had to take the responsibility coming every Tuesday and so forth and so on.
For sure.
So thank you.
And thank you. And thank you, Kalamo. I will say it as often as I can. I would not be the writer that I am without you, without Nomo. And thank you for not only your mentorship as a writer, but just your eldership. You know, you're looking out for me and my family. That will always be appreciated. So much love to you always.
Oh, and say hello to the family, especially
I will.
that old
Yeah.
lady that's a little girl. You know what I'm saying?
She loves you, and I know you love her. So thank you.
Yeah.
And sorry, not sure why our camera isn't going on. I apologize for that. But here is Mama Vera to say a few words. Again, I apologize for the tech glitch. I don't know why our camera isn't coming on. Sorry for this.
Oops. Did we lose Mama Vera?
Well, I guess they're saying that's all, folks.
I guess it is. But it's been a pleasure, Kalamu, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Peace, man. Okay, I'm just going to sign off because I don't know what's happening here.